Hi, my name is Nathan. You're watching Nice at Dice, and today I am talking about a game called Tsuro of the Seas. Now, Tsuro is a game that was originally released in about 2004, I think, and then maybe about 8 years later, they released this sequel, Tsuro of the Seas. One of the things that I like about Tsuro of the Seas is that you can essentially play the original Tsuro with this game, but then it also adds some additional elements, basically the addition of sea monsters that rove about the board and disrupt the activities of the players. So it adds that element to it, but you can play the original or you can play it with that additional element to it. So I'm going to show you basically how you play Tsuro, the original game, and then how the introduction of the Daikaiju or the sea monsters works and how that affects the gameplay. And then we'll come back here and I'll tell you my thoughts on both games. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to start by sort of walking you through how the basic game of Tsuro works, and then I'll show you what's added by the Tsuro of the Seas version of the game. So in a game of Tsuro, you have a board with a grid on it like this. You can see the grid lines better in some places, like up here, than across the picture, but when you're looking at it in person, the grid lines are pretty obvious. And you have little marks along the edge of the board like this, these little white marks. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to choose someone to go first, and they're going to place their little plastic boat that represents them. This is their player piece. They're going to place it on one of those little white marks. You're going to go around. Each player in turn is going to place their boat on one of those white marks. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of these little plastic boats in different colors for up to 8 players. And after everybody has placed their boats, you're going to get 3 tiles each. And we'll say that we'll start with the white player here, and they're going to look at their tiles. And as you can see, these tiles have basically these wake lines on them. And so they're going to place the tiles, and they're going to choose one tile to place, and it needs to be placed in such a way that one of these wake lines begins at the spot where their boat currently is. So if we're saying that we're playing with the white player right here, let's say that they place this tile on this spot on the grid, because their boat's right here. So they'll place that, and then they'll move their boat along that tile to the end of that wake line right there. And then they're going to draw another tile to replace the one that they played. And we'll move to the black player now. So the black player is going to look at their tiles. And let's say they might grab this one for starters. We'll place it there. They'll move themselves to the end of that line. Grab another tile to replace it. And so forth and so on. Just moving around the board like so. Eventually you're going to get a number of tiles on the board. Maybe something like so for the red player. He's going to end up here. The black player continues to play some additional tiles. Maybe something like this. And then that. And then let's see. Just looking for some more options. Here we go. Maybe something like that. Well, these are 2 tiles together. All right, and as you can see, you're gradually filling up the board with these different tiles as the players continue to move along. And eventually the players are going to start to move closer to one another. So they're going to be fighting over space a little bit. And you can get some interesting little things where, like, for example, you have a route like this, maybe gets placed there. And so now he's actually going to come around on the same tile that he was on and end up over there. So you can have interesting little things like that. And now you have a situation where you've got 2 different players who are bordering the same space on the board. And so one of those players is going to take a turn. They're going to have to play a tile in that space. So they might play a tile like so. And now each of these players is going to move along that route. So that player will move there, this player will move along to there. So you can, in effect, manipulate where other players go with their boats by the actions you take in placing those tiles. The goal of the game is to play until you are the only boat left on the board. So, for example, this guy might eventually end up in a situation where he is perhaps right here, and you have tiles like that. So now he has to place a tile here to advance himself, but his options may only allow him to go to either this spot, or directly to the edge of the board, in which case, no matter what he gets, it's not going to turn out well for him. He's going to end up going off the board, and he'll be out of the game. And the other players will keep playing until there's only one person left. If you should ever get to a weird spot where two players happen to go off the board at the same time, and they were the last two players, then they both tie with the win. So that's basically how a game of Tsuro works. Tsuro of the Seas adds to that a couple of elements, a couple of dice, and some other tiles. And these tiles are called Daikaiju, and they're basically sea monsters. And there's some variety to them, but they all have some similar elements, which is that they have 4 arrows pointing one in each of the 4 cardinal directions. And they also have this little turning arrow. And all of these arrows, the cardinal arrows and the turning arrow, all have a number on them. And the numbers range from 1 to 5. So that's important. And I'll show you how you set up the game with those. So we'll clear the board, and we'll say we take these 2 dice. You can see that one of them is a gold color, one of them is a blue color. You're going to roll both of them. That gets you 2 numbers. And as you can see across the top of the board, you have these little diamond shapes with numbers in them. So we rolled a 3 there. And then you have the same thing over here, but the diamond shapes are blue. So the blue die goes with those. So we have a blue 1 and a gold 3. And so that indicates this column and this row. We find where those intersect right here, and we grab a random sea monster tile and we place it there face down. And then we do this again, and we place another one. So we've got a 4 and a 3 right there. And we do it again. So we've got a 6 and a 1 right there. And we do it again, and we've got a 6 and a 6 right there. And let's see, a 6 and a 1. Okay, so that's the same thing again, so we can't put 2 on the same spot, so we'll just re-roll for these. We've got a 6 and a 5. And we're going to place a total of 6 of these. So we got a 4 and a 4. Well, that spot's already taken. A 5 and a 3. There we go. All right. And as you can see, you kind of spin these around and place them in sort of random orientations. And then once they're all out, you just flip them all over. Like so. Okay, so now we have these sea monsters on the board, and now that's going to add an extra step to what you do on your turn. So let's say the red player is right here, and it's his turn. The first thing he's going to do is he's going to pick up these dice. He's going to roll them both together, and he's going to see what he got. If he got a 6, 7, or 8, which he did get a 7, then that means that the Daikaiju are going to activate. So now you take just one of the dice, and you roll it again, and it came up a 2. So you're going to go through all of these in order, and the order that you're looking at is based on this number in the corner, this little like turning arrow. So you're going to look at this number on each of these, and you're going to go through them in order from the lowest number to the highest. So we'll see here that we have a 1. So we'll activate this guy first, and the number that we rolled on this die was a 2. So we'll just remember this guy was oriented like this, and we're going to pick him up and we're going to see, oh, 2 is this arrow. So he was right here, he's going to move that way 1. Okay, then we're going to look for the next number. So this guy's got a 2 in the corner, and so that means, and we rolled a 2, so that means he's just going to turn in that direction. Then we look and we see, well, this is a 3 and this is also a 3. So in this case, what we're looking at is this has a gold arrow and this has a blue arrow. So we're going to do the gold one first. And for him on a 2, he's going to move this way. And then we'll do this guy next. And for him on a 2, he's going to move down this way. And then, let's see, we have a 4. So this guy on a 2 is going to go this way, and then we have this guy, he's a 5 in the corner, and so on a 2 he goes this direction. All right, so we've moved all those different sea monsters. If a sea monster was to move off the edge of the board, then he's just removed from the game, and that is fine. We have 1 less sea monster. If there's ever less than 3 sea monsters, then you have to add more to bring it back up to 3. If this sea monster were to move onto the space that's occupied by this sea monster, he would eliminate that sea monster. The moving monster always eliminates the stationary one. And apart from that, what is also going to be done by these sea monsters is, let's say we have some wake tiles that have been laid out because people have been playing for a little while. And so now this sea monster moves up where this wake tile is. He removes that wake tile and replaces it. And now what that's going to do is later, this guy, let's say he moves again, well, now there's an empty spot here. So if somebody were to end up, say, on this route right there, they could place a completely different tile down there and take them somewhere else. So that's what can happen with that. If I am on this spot and a monster comes along and he's going to move on to that spot, he takes me out of the game and removes that, and he moves into that spot. So players can be eliminated by monsters moving into the spots that they occupy. If it was my turn and I was right here, and this monster happened to move here at the beginning of my turn, well, now I'm also eliminated from the game because I have nowhere to go on my turn. I'm just going to be food for the monster. So that's another way you can be eliminated. So it adds another element to the game, some randomness from the placement and movements of monsters, and it creates situations where parts of the board that were previously filled up and therefore you could not travel back into those parts of the board can become cleared by the monsters, and therefore you can kind of create new routes where routes have been cleared from the board. So that's basically how the game works. Let's go back up top and I'll tell you my thoughts on it. Okay, so let's start by talking about just the basic game Tsuro, which is not what I have here, but as I demonstrated, you can play the basic Tsuro game with Tsuro of the Seas. Now, I will say that Tsuro of the Seas, in the rulebook, they don't really spell that out for you and tell you, hey, this is the basic game if you want to play that, and this is the added elements if you want to include those. They don't really break that out for you, so you would have to be familiar with the existence and the rules of the original game to really recognize that this is something you can do with Tsuro of the Seas. However, if you're just aware of that, it's not hard to figure out how to do that with this game. Basically, if you just ignore all the rules pertaining to the sea monsters, then there you go, you have the original game. So the original game is very fun. It can be pretty chaotic depending on how many players you have. It can go from 2 to 8 players. With just 2 players, the board feels very big. It feels like you can spend a lot of time just kind of navigating the board without really bumping into each other, without really having to worry too much about each other at all. In fact, I think with 2 or 3 players, it's not a very exciting game. But once you get 4, 5, 6, and onward, the game gets a lot more interesting. And if you have that like upper limit of 6, 7, or 8, it can get pretty chaotic. So be aware of that going into it, but it is definitely a fun and interesting game. There is a certain amount of strategy to it because you have 3 tiles at a time that you're looking at. You only have one spot where you can play the tile, which is directly in front of your player piece, but you can choose between those 3 tiles. You can choose how to rotate those tiles as you place them, and so that gives you a variety of options as far as how you navigate your ship around the board. I'm not usually a big fan of player elimination, which is what this game is all about. It's about eliminating all the other players, being the last person standing. But honestly, this is the kind of game that I think really thrives in a situation where you have a larger group of players, and it's more of like a social gathering than a gaming event. So if you're getting together with friends and family just to get together and you want to play a game to sort of keep everyone entertained for a little while, I think this is a good game to break out in that kind of situation because the rules can be explained very quickly. They're relatively simple. It's very intuitive because everything is, you're just literally building routes across the board and moving your boats across those routes. So there's not a lot of complicated rules. People can pretty quickly grasp the spatial element of the game. So I think it works well in those types of situations where you're like, we're getting together just to get together and let's play a game too. And in those kinds of situations, I don't mind the player elimination so much because once a player's been eliminated, they can still sit around the table and enjoy conversation. They can maybe even get up from the table and go join a conversation happening elsewhere. And so in those types of situations, the player elimination isn't such a big deal, but it is something to be aware of. So overall, I'd say I give a pretty good rating to the base game. I'd say with the right group and the right circumstance, it is an excellent game to break out, and I would definitely recommend it. And I do like that Tsuro of the Seas. While they don't specifically spell it out in the rulebook, it does really allow you to play that base game without adding in the additional stuff, the Daikaiju or the sea monsters. So then, what about those Daikaiju? What do I think of that? Well, honestly, I'm not too excited about them. I like that I have this version of the game, which allows me to play the base game, and optionally I can add in those sea monsters. But I think the majority of the time I'm not going to use them. I think I would use them if there was a situation where, like I said, it's more of a social gathering. You get a group of people to sit down and they play through the game and they enjoy it and they want to play again and they enjoy it the second time, and you still have people who want to play maybe like a third or a fourth time, then I'd say, all right, let's switch things up and throw in these sea monsters just to get a different experience out of it. But I think if you're just kind of sitting down for one game or even a couple of games in a row, I would ignore the sea monsters for the most part because I feel like they make the game much more chaotic. And maybe that's to your taste, but it's not to my taste personally. It makes it much more difficult to kind of plan what you're going to do, and it makes it much more luck-based whether or not you get to stay in the game. So it's kind of frustrating to be playing and have that experience of just being eliminated from the game because of the roll of the dice. So those are my thoughts on that. It's a nice optional element of the game, but I'm glad that the way the game is designed, you can play the original with this, and that's just an optional thing you can add on. I do sort of wish that in the rulebook they kind of spelled out that hey, this is the base game with these rules. You can play it this way if you want, but here are the Tsuro of the Sea elements that you can then add into the game. So, but again, those are my thoughts on Tsuro of the Seas. Overall, I give it a good rating. I think if you were gonna, if this was unavailable to you, but just the plain Tsuro was available, go ahead and snag that up because it is a good game, and what it adds is not really great. It's okay. I'd give it like, you know, kind of middle of the road, 6 out of 10 sort of rating for the additional content. Whereas I would give a higher rating to the original game. So anyhow, those are my thoughts on Tsuro and Tsuro of the Seas. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Nathan. This is Nice at Dice, and you enjoy the rest of your day.